Today we're going to be making something exciting, and it's called a 3D layered panel bust corset. And we are going to be using a UK size 12 dress form. These are the tools that we'll be using today. I've got my straight ruler, I've got my pattern paper, I've got my wadding, I've got my paper scissors, my fabric scissors, my masking tape, I've got my measuring tape, I've got my pencil, I've got my permanent markers. This is just for this video in order for you guys to see all the lines, but other than that, you're not supposed to use your permanent marker when pattern cutting or when pattern making. And this is my curve ruler, my French curve, and that is my calico fabric that I'll be using for the twirl. Now, these are all the tools that we will be using for today's tutorial. First of all, I am going to create a bust pad for this tutorial, and that is because the dress form is a bit flat at the bust area, so I just want to add a bit of volume to the bust part. So I'm going to create a bust pad for this. Now I have measured 3 inches from the neck. The base of the neck downwards 3 inches, and on the shoulder I have measured 5 inches downwards. This is just a guide. This is nothing specific. It's just a guide for me to start draping the front bodies. You're going to see that in a bit. It's going to make sense in a bit. So yeah, I'm just going to create a guide using my sewing pin. So I'm just pinning that, as you can see. So once that is done, I am going to measure from the top bust to underneath the bust, and that is going to give me exactly what I need for the length of my calico. This is what I am going to use. So this measurement is what I'm going to cut out of the calico to drape the bust pad. Again, it's going to make sense in a bit. So all of this is just to get the length of the calico that I'm using for the bust pad. And once that is done, I am going to measure the width of the calico that I'm using for the bust pad. Again, I am going to start from the center front to the side seam of the dress form. And that is going to be the length of my calico that I'm using for the bust pad. Once I'm done with the measurement, I am going to use those measurements to cut out a calico. This is a piece of calico, and it's exactly the length and the width of the measurement that I just took from the dress form. So I've transferred that onto the calico or muslin, and I've used that to cut this out. So what I've done is to fold this in half, like you can see on the video. And once it's folded in half, I am going to cut that out in 2. And one part is what I'm going to use for the bust pad. Now that I'm done cutting the calico in 2, I'm just going to start with one part of the calico, and I'm going to pin exactly where I've placed my sewing pins earlier on. And I'm going to fold this in half again. This is just to get a guideline or a grain line so I can pin this on top of the princess seam. You're going to see that in a bit. So that's going to create a crease. Once it's created a crease, I am going to pin along the princess seam. Just for the sake of the video, I have drawn, using my permanent marker, a straight line on that crease. This is a grain line to give me a guide, and I'm going to pin along that grain line onto the princess seam. This is for you guys to see. So here, I'm just going to place that on top of the princess seam, and I am going to pin along. Just going to continue draping the bust part, and once you're done, you're going to draw your style line. So I'm just going to draw a bust shape, and I'm using my permanent marker for you guys to see. So I'm just going to mark the center point or the apex point, and that's for the bust dot. That's what I'm doing right now. And this is the bust pad pattern or template, and you're just going to label it. So this is what I've done here. So once that is done, I'm going to cut that out, just cut out the shape, and that will be the pattern for my bust pad. So now I'm done cutting that out. I am going to use that pattern onto my wooden, and I'm going to place that and cut that out. And that will be my bust pad. Just exactly what I'm doing here. You're just going to follow what I'm doing and just cut that out. And we're going to drape the wooden onto the bust panel or the bust part of the dress form. So this is what I'm doing, just cutting this out. And once it's been cut out, I am going to place that on the dress form. So what I'm doing here is just placing the wooden onto the bust part. And again, I am draping using the wooden as my material. I am going to cut out the bust part, and this is going to serve as my bust pad. For the dot area, I am going to use a masking tape to seal that up so it's smooth for me to drape onto. And that is done for the bust pad. Now I am going to get my masking tape and I'm going to drape the front bodies of this pattern or this corset that we're trying to make. And for this part, you want to be careful because you just don't want to use one layer of masking tape to drape your bodies. You want to use 2 or 3 layers of masking tape. The reason being is that you don't want to tear the masking tape when pulling it off from the mannequin or the dress form. So you want a strong base. So when you're taking this out, it doesn't tear or it doesn't come off. So that's why we need 2 or 3 layers in order to get the pattern strong enough for you to take out. So I am just going to mark my style line. And again, it's up to you how you want the center part of your corset to be, how deep you want the sweetheart panel or style line to be. But this is what I've done. So I have cut out the excess masking tape and leaving the pattern that I need. So now our pattern is done. I am going to draw the bust part of this corset. As you can see, I have it in different panels, just the bust part. I'm concentrating on the bust part. You want to make sure you label all your panels because this can be very confusing after cutting out. So you want to make sure you know what is what. And I've gone to the bodies part, underneath the bust part. And that's my corset area. So I've done the back and I've done the front. So what I'm going to do, I am going to cut this into sections and you're going to see that in a bit. Now I'm going to start with the back pattern. So I'm going to cut this into 2 sections, or 2 panels rather. So the side panel and the center back panel. The reason being starting with this is because it's easier. It's just got 2 panels, so it's way easier for me to start with that. So I'm going to cut that into 2 panels. So once I'm done with that, I am going to go to the front area. I am not going to touch the bust part at the moment. I'm going to show you what we're going to do with the bust part. But for now, we're just going to concentrate on the corset area, which is the back and the front of the corset. So you want to make sure you cut that into 2 and place that onto your pattern paper, leaving 1 centimeter for your seam allowance or any amount of seam allowance that you require. But for me, I am using 1 centimeter for my seam allowance. So once that is done, I'm going to concentrate on the front part. Again, I'm going to leave the bust part. But remember, for the bust part, make sure you label all your patterns and make sure you mark them out as well because it can be confusing when you are about to sew them together. So remember, for the bust part, I said you should leave that. The reason being is that we are going to use this to drape out the bust panel pattern. So I am going to get a calico right now, and I'm going to drape exactly what is here onto the calico, and that will be used for the base of my layering panel. So remember, you're going to get out a calico and drape exactly what you see here and use that as the base of the panels, that, you know, the decorative part of the corset. This is what we're going to do. So we're going to create a base for that. And once that is done, you are going to go ahead and continue cutting this in sections. So I've got in my calico, I'm just going to do a rough drape, and this is for the base of the paneling section of my corset. So this is going to make sense in a bit, so don't worry about it. Just follow me and do what I've just asked you to do. So I have created the pattern for this, and I have gone ahead to cut out the base and the front corset part. So once you have all the pattern pieces sectioned in different panels, you are going to place this on your pattern paper, add your seam allowance, and cut this out. So I have the bust pattern, I have the front corset pattern, and I have the back corset pattern. Remember the bust panel pattern that we draped? So we're going to use that now. So this is it. And we're going to place that onto the pad, the bust pad. And I'm going to use this as the base of our panel section on the corset. So we're just going to pin that. Once you're done pinning that onto your bust pad, you're going to draw your style line. This is for the panels, and I'm using a different shade of marker for this so you can differentiate the main bodies and the panel pattern. So this is what I've done. We have numbered and labeled our pattern, and we're going to cut each section individually. So before you start cutting out the sections, you are going to close the dot. I've used another color of marker to create the bust dot, and I'm going to close the bust dot. So in order for you to close the bust dot, you need to mark your notches, fold that into the lines, and use your masking tape to seal that dot up. So once that is done, this is going to create a full pattern piece, and you're going to start sectioning all the panels. So starting from one, you're just going to cut each panels out and trace that onto your new pattern paper, leaving your 1 centimeter seam allowance or whatever amount you need, and that will be for the bust panels. Now that you've cut out the panels in sections, you're going to trace that out onto your new pattern paper and your seam allowance included, and watch out for part 2.